15 years ago, August 29, 2005, I was leaving my house on my way to work. As I was going to work, after catching the bus and making it to Canal Street, there was something missing. That sense of urgency was missing. While the buses was running on a regular weekend schedule, there were no buses lined up anywhere in the city. No checkpoints or nothing. We went about the day as if it was normal, like it was a bright, clear, sunny day. And that is the one thing that bothered me. And there was little of it as I headed home from work, trying to remove debris and other stuff from off my house and from around the house, right there on North Johnson. The people knew what was coming. And this was like a day away before it hit. But the mayor went about it as if it was a normal, clear day. Yes, he discussed about contraflow and what you had to do to drive out of the city, not taking into account that there's people who can't afford to leave, and that includes the elderly. Where was the help for them? Nothing. So we sat there and watched our news outlets. We sat there and watched our news outlets to get the latest on the storm. And sure enough, it was headed this way. Storm surge, wind, and everything. And my only worry was the transformer across the street from my house. And then later that night, the levees broke. And this is what we end up with. Water so high all the way up to the roof. People was trapped inside their house, some didn't make it. And this was basically poor planning, mainly by the city. They're concerned about the ones who are able to get out and not so much those who can't. And so many perished because of it. Stores and other places was flooded as well. And this is what it looked like in the lower ninth ward, mainly the deepest part of the city. This is why New Orleans was called the Bowl. And I remember a year prior, on a local cable access channel, someone called in the show, talked about politics as usual, but then he brought up the fact that he said that New Orleans isn't below sea level and all that was just lies, trying to frighten the people. And then we see this a year later. My question is to the fella, number one, where are you? And two, you see now? And this was the daily reality for all of us, day in and day out, looking for help. And I had asked someone who's close to me, why is it taking forever? And she was like, they can't save everybody. I'm like, really? In a dire emergency, in a disaster area such as this place, in places like this that was in the path of the storm, and you telling me they can't get everybody? Almost a year prior, there was a tsunami in the Pacific, something that came without warning. How did they manage to get help immediately after all of that? You mean to tell me they can't do this in a city? One of the cities that got hit hard. And you mean to tell me they can't help? All them planes flying around, all them boats hovering through the streets? Because that's how you get there, by boat. Or you had a truck with large wheels. And this went on for days. I don't know if they were taking pictures or making best to see how many of us fall. After all, New Orleans is a predominantly black city, and we already got a dark cloud hanging over our head as far as how we're being treated, not only in New Orleans, but the entire United States and globally. And he talking about they can't help. And yes, America does need help because its problems are internal. It has nothing to do with the outside. It's all internally. And it's dealing with us as black melanated people, foundational black Americans. And it's shown in all media outlets. During the storm, everybody was trying to gather things for their survival. And look at how they differentiate the two. If you're Caucasian, you're finding stuff. If you're black and melanated, you're looting. So how are they looking for stuff and we're looting and we're doing the exact same thing? Once again, propaganda. It happened around my house. There was 2 stores between my house where I live. And I seen people getting stuff mainly to survive. We wouldn't even think about no looting. We know the stores ain't open. We gotta eat. Some of us had children. They need to eat. They need diapers. During that time, my son was 3 years old. And there was no way in hell he was gonna starve. While most were in the store, I was on the outside, looking around and looking up just in case something goes down. And I had to warn everybody. Luckily, it didn't happen. But it's foolish to say we looting. If we looting, they looting too. How come you don't have the same smoke for them? Why it gotta be black people? Nah, there's some of us who broke in the stores for the wrong reasons. But most of us, it was for reasons of survival. Ain't nobody thinking about looting at a time of crisis. So where they get all this stuff from? It just don't make any sense to me. And now these race soldiers are armed to the teeth, ready to shoot anybody that loots, specifically those who look just like me. And this is sad. There was no plan put in place to make sure we get out of the city. That means a lot of the locals were stuck, and even the tourists who stayed in hotels were stuck. A lot of us have children, small children, and we also had to tend to the elderly. And we went days in and days out watching bodies drop. And this is a traumatic scene. And the fact that the levees had broke made things worse. And there were many questions concerning the levees. Some say there was a barge left over that was unanchored. And some say that they were blown up. I have every reason to believe they were altered, because we've been hearing years leading up to the storm that the levees ain't strong enough to handle no storm surge for a category 3 and up. We had a hurricane 40 years prior, Hurricane Betsy. You mean to tell me y'all had a 40-year head start and y'all couldn't come up with nothing? I mean nothing. That's piss poor. There's absolutely no excuse for that. None. That's too much on these pumps. But unfortunately, for one, the pumps can only handle so much, and two, a few of them gave out, which is why this administration, compared to administrations past, are trying not to let what happened back then happen again. They want every pumping station to be up and running this time around. Well, we done dodged 2 bullets. Marco fizzled out before he made landfall, and Laura got stronger, and both of them were misses. For as the greater New Orleans area is concerned, they were misses. But we're not out of the woods yet. In 2020, we're not out of the woods yet. Because with this city that sits below sea level, like many other major cities, like Houston and Miami, New Orleans is susceptible to flooding. And ironically, we have a street called Flood Street, which is located in the Lower Ninth Ward, which at times gets lampooned, and other times is a truth-telling reminder This is the same flood street during Hurricane Betsy. And compared to Betsy, at a time of racial inequality and racial tension, blacks and whites helped each other out during that time compared to what happened during Katrina. Even as the administration had managed to get things sorted out compared to the administration we had during Katrina. The flooding reached beyond 10 feet, mostly in the lower Ninth Ward, which is, in fact, the deepest area of New Orleans. The only place in New Orleans that had the least flooding was the Algiers area west of the Mississippi River. At the convention center, you had people praying and hoping for a day to get rescued because it was still the summer, it was still hot, and we wanted relief from the heat. So we need nourishment like water, food, or whatever, just to survive. And also, they don't want to see no one, including their loved ones, suffer and fall because of this disaster. Now, the Superdome, not many people were lucky. The building, which less than 2 months earlier had hosted Essence Fest, and then later, the Saints played what would be their only game of 2005, a preseason game against the Baltimore Ravens, days before the storm. And the team had to play all of their home games outside of New Orleans. But inside the dome, it was pure hell. There was all kinds of horror stories inside of what is the home of the New Orleans Saints. Horror stories like the elderly were being mistreated, children being violated, and suicides. Someone had told me that somebody in the dome had jumped to his death, and the reason, someone told him that he lost pretty much all his family. And that is the last thing you want to hear, something like that. You're losing your entire family, or a majority of them, that'll drive you to that point. And that, in some cases, had actually happened. And once everybody was out of the city and out of the dome, them holes in the roof are a reminder of what was, and also a beacon of light for what is to come. And speaking of the administration, we had a mayor who I didn't vote for. I wanted the ex-police chief to be the mayor of the city. I know some of the people who was on the force, some want him in, some don't want him in. But he had help from white people, the majority white vote that won him the election. I wasn't even confident in him. That's the reason why I didn't vote for him. I wasn't confident. And we seen that, how he handled the Katrina situation. Some people say he wasn't ready. Well, he has an administration, don't he? Don't he have an administration? And isn't he from the boomer generation? And I know a lot of them who are in that administration who came from the boomer generation. They went through Hurricane Betsy. You mean to tell me 40 years leading to Katrina, he hasn't been briefed or had anybody to come up with a plan prior to the start of hurricane season of what we need to do in case we get hit with a big one? And be honest, we were due for one. But during those 40 years after Katrina, everybody pretty much got lax, especially with the drainage situation. Because now they're taking care of the drains on Napoleon Avenue, they're taking care of the drains on Jefferson Avenue, they're taking care of the drains on Florida Avenue, and even Canal Boulevard. My question is this: where was all this prior to 2005? And why didn't this administration stress it enough to get everybody to do the work that needs to be done? Stormed and passed, we sitting in our houses in the heat for 5 days. 5 whole days. And the only thing he could do is get on the radio and drop enough cuss words to make Cheeky Black smile. Cause now he on a guilt trip. Man, you should have did your job, fam. And then you're gonna talk about not shelving Mardi Gras for 1 year? How you gonna let the parades roll when the city isn't up to snuff? You could have at least waited 1 year to get halfway together. You can't do that just one time. And I know a lot of people in the city didn't want him to cancel Mardi Gras. And I'm like, for what? Why you want the parades to roll and you don't have a house? You live in a tent somewhere under the I-10 overpass on Claiborne Avenue somewhere, or under the I-10 overpass in the east, or uptown, wherever. You can't just put that away just one time until the city is up to snuff. The city is back halfway. Was this about the money? I don't believe so. I know so. It had to be about the money. And another thing he did that to me, he told the truth about, but it was asinine and how he said it. It was asinine. The truth that he said that New Orleans was a chocolate city. The asinine part came was where he said it at. He said it during a rally. And that got a lot of the people, particularly those of Caucasian persuasion, riled up. Because after all, they were the ones who voted him in the first time. And this was during an election year. Luckily, he blew past that and went to a runoff against a lieutenant governor of the state of Louisiana, who is part of a political family and who is from New Orleans. And he's Caucasian. And this is the one thing that made me look at my people totally different as far as the election process go. Black people didn't start voting Democrat until the 1960s when LBJ was giving away the goodies like welfare, food stamps, Section 8 housing, which led to the father being out of the house because she would lose her benefits if he lived there, and they do inspect. And I came to that realization growing up in the projects because I rarely ever saw the man of the house. If you catch him before 6:30 in the morning and 6:30 at night, after 6:30 a.m. and before 6:30 at night, you ain't gonna see him because housing authority will send somebody to inspect them houses. They will inspect those units to see if the father of the house is living there. Now they don't mind the grown children, as long as the father ain't there. He usually got to change the clothes in a bag somewhere, and he's off until he comes back home, because he pretty much knows the deal. And you can't say that a lot of these fathers were deadbeats. They were put in a bad situation. And then they were also put in another bad situation because all the manufacturing jobs were being outsourced outside the United States, which means they could barely find work that involves manual labor unless it's at a hotel. And we rarely ever get hired for those positions, like talking about it. And then to add more insult to injury, the crack era. We want to make sure that none of us find any work, so we look to sell drugs just to get out of the situation. But then comes where the overhauling of the prison system comes in, which was also done in the 1960s. And you got one senator who's now running for president who altered a crime bill back in 1994 that the president approved, which led to privatized prisons because now the prison industrial complex is big business. And you got major corporations investing in prisons because they want to profit off of the so-called super predators. They basically talking about cats like Jay-Z, who at that time was selling before he blew up in the rap industry. They want to profit off of him being locked up. They want to profit off anybody that's locked up. To where they got Rick James making license plates while singing Super Freak. And that's sad. Correct me if I'm wrong on that. We were told that voting Democrat was good, and if you vote Republican, you're a sellout because you're voting for racists. I want to clear that up. Who authored the Emancipation Proclamation? It was Republicans. And what party started the Confederacy? it was Democrats. Confederacy was a Democratic thing. Those who vote Republican didn't take heed to that and adopted that until after the 1960s, if I stand correct. To say Democrats is less racist, to me, is asinine. Before Donald Trump became a Republican, he was Democrat. And so was David Duke. And so was George Wallace. But I don't think nobody want to talk about that because they want to hold on to the narrative and make it about morality instead of making it for the best interest of the people. And we seen how we handled the Clintons. We loved him when we got in. We adopted him as the first black president, all because he was on Arsenio wearing shades and playing the saxophone. Okay, but then we turned against them after Hillary wanted to run for president. At the time, Barack Obama, a senator from Illinois, threw his hat in the ring. We got on the Clintons because of what Bill said, that it was more like a pipe dream to have a black president in this country. So Obama got in, he did his 2 terms, and now rewriting Hillary's jock again? Please explain that. First you said they were racist, now they our friend? First you said they were our friend, now they racist? Just like with the mayor's race in 2006. A lot of people didn't want Mitch Landrieu in office because he was white. It wasn't because he was Republican, it was because he's white. And he wasn't a Republican, he was a Democrat. Just like his sister and his dad, who was once mayor of the city from 1970 to 1978. This time, this mayor got a second term. And this time, mostly black people voted him back in. And then he got into some trouble. That happened while he was in office. And suddenly, the white guy who we didn't want to be the mayor of the city becomes mayor of the city. And he served 2 terms. But before we had a black lady who's currently in office right now. I just want to throw that in there. Because a lot of these things just don't make any sense. Now, after 13 months, the Superdome reopened. The hole in the roof was patched up, the turf is cleaned up, got a new scoreboard, new jumbotron, and the Saints' grand reopening was against the Atlanta Falcons, where that one iconic play of Steve Gleason blocking the punt and Deloach scoring the touchdown, the dome reopening led to it having naming rights and having the championship square, where a statue of Steve Gleason's block of Atlanta's punt is located. And it was a fun sight to see, having the team back at home. But there were still issues going on throughout the city. And one being the Lower Ninth Ward as a tourist attraction. How disrespectful can you get? Why are you going to turn a disaster area into a tourist attraction? I mean, this ain't like the Motown Museum or the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame or the Pro Football Hall of Fame. This is a disaster area. You're turning the neighborhood, seeing houses knocked down, cars and boats sitting on top of other houses. What's this about money? I don't believe so. I know so. Meanwhile, you got 7 housing projects still standing, but also find an excuse to knock them down. To further push the narrative that housing projects in the city of New Orleans as well as the United States had served their purpose, which led to the demolition of Cabrini Green in Chicago and Fraser Courts in Dallas. There was 3 that was already torn down prior to the storm, which was St. Thomas, Florida, and the one I grew up in, Desire, the largest housing project in the city and the cheaply built housing project in the city. Because had Desire stayed during Katrina, it wouldn't have made it because it was still rotting from Betsy. Because water inundated the projects too, all 262 buildings, till it nearly got up to the 2nd floor. And it's been rotting ever since. And 3 of the last buildings were torn down months before Katrina. Now, people who stayed in the projects was telling a story as to why they can't move back. Someone I used to work with, a lady who lived in Magnolia CJP, the same housing project Soldier Slim is from. She said she was cleaning up one day, and then a few days later, she noticed the cabinets was knocked down, and she noticed that there was holes in the roof. Now, I've been through all the housing projects in New Orleans, besides the one I grew up in. And you talking about the Magnolia CJP and Juvenile, I can tell you this. They don't have trees that tall. So how did those roofs get holes, and where the blue tarp came in all of a sudden? That's a big question mark. Where did all it come from? Because she said it wasn't there before, but it got there the time she came back. But that's what happened. Places like St. Bernard, Magnolia CJP, Lafitte, Iberville, Melpomene Gus, Callio B.W. Cooper, the home of Master P. All those places were deemed for demolition, and they were all demolished, leading up to the 15th anniversary of Katrina. Because now St. Bernard is Columbia Park, Magnolia CJP is now Harmony Oaks, the Iberville is now Bienville Basin, Callio is now Marrero Commons. If housing is a human right, indeed, and to shortchange to people like that is almost felonious. And also, it was a mistake that the boomers made, mainly the civil rights generation. While we was fighting for crumbs off the master's table, we wanted to get a piece of pie instead of getting the whole recipe so we can make our own pie. Starting with group economics, to where we can get the politicians on our side, to where we had the judicial system working for us, and to keep the media from working against us, to where we control our own narrative, and plus, how we educate our young. The very 5-step process that Dr. Claude Anderson talked about, every other race and nationality in the United States is doing it, except black people. And that was the one thing the civil rights generation failed to teach us, which is the reason why Jason Black called them failures. And it's pretty evident. And we treat voting as a life or death situation. How many times we voted and why things for us keep getting worse? You answer that question. Because far as we know, things ain't getting any better. Because once the projects was torn down and they rebuilt it to these nice townhouse and condo style apartments, we were put on a waiting list. And at one time, they shut it down because they wasn't taking any more people. And the ones that could go into those places, you have to make a certain amount of money in order for you to do so. And also, they give you a time where they accept applications. And there were other places that wasn't being rebuilt that fell to the hurricane. One of those places is the extension to the Desire, Florida area called Press Park and Gordon Plaza. Now, Press Park, which was built in 1971, along with Gordon Plaza, it was built on top of what you see at the bottom part of the screen. It was built on top of what is called the Agriculture Street Landfill. Now, this landfill was open up until the late 1950s, but reopened again briefly after Hurricane Betsy. Once it closed again, they cleared out the area and built the Press Park Apartments and Gordon Plaza for the elderly, which many call Cancer Alley, because a lot of people was affected by it, and there were a few casualties due to it, and it's now considered a Superfund site. While there were certain places that have yet to be rebuilt, other places were, mostly in the Lower Ninth Ward. And there was other places that was left stranded for years. And there's no telling when or if they're ever gonna get it back to functioning again. Like the amusement park Jazzland, which later became Six Flags New Orleans. The city was trying its best and trying like hell to bring a new amusement park to New Orleans after the loss of both Lincoln Beach and Pontchartrain Beach. So in the early 2000s, Jazzland, later Six Flags New Orleans, came into existence, and it ran up until August 28, which was closed for the storm. And 15 years later, it's still sitting there. And I really don't think anyone made an effort, a real effort, to get it back up and running again. So it's kind of foolish for any mayor of the city talking about New Orleans is back. No, we far from it. And there's no way in the world a city will look like this 15 years later. It's supposed to look like this the first 2 years in. And it's supposed to be improved after those 2 years. What's the holdup? The same thing with our malls. I think New Orleans is the only city, the only major city without a functioning shopping mall, like the Plaza in Lake Forest. This plaza has been here for decades, and it's been one of the shopping hubs in eastern New Orleans. But after Katrina, there was no plans of keeping it open, so it was demolished. And a portion of that spot was used to build a hardware store, which as of last year had closed. The same thing with the East Lake Plaza, which later became a Save-A-Lot. Now it's a vacant lot, and the Save-A-Lot moved on Lake Forest near the Plaza site at the old Walgreens location. The Carrollton Shopping Mall uptown on Carrollton Avenue, after Katrina, that too got demolished, and in its place, a Costco. The Gentilly Woods Mall on Shepherdton Highway in Louisa is now a Gentilly Walmart. Lakeland Hospital, where my son was born, is no longer there. It's now Walmart on Bullard Avenue, just on the other side of the I-10 service road from where the original Walmart location was, which also had a Sam's Club next door. And currently, that too is a vacant lot. It's 15 years after the big one hit the city. And to quote former New Orleans Saints head coach Jim Mora, we got a long way to go. We got a lot of work to do. We're close, and close don't mean shit. Not only you can put that on TV for me, but you could post this all over the internet. That's all I gotta say, and I'm out.